exploring the issues that matter to you. This is Panhandle Politics.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Panhandle Politics. I'm your host, Tom Lewis, and we appreciate you joining us today. We are moving into, believe it or not, the campaign season. We've already started to have a lot of folks declaring for office. Of course, a lot of that was precipitated by Congressman Neil Dunn deciding and announcing that he is not going to run for another term. So we've had a number of people jump into the race. One of those is our guest today. His name is Austin Rogers. He's a Republican candidate for the 2nd Congressional District. Austin, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. We got a lot to cover in about a half an hour, so let's jump right into it. Tell us about you and why you're running.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Austin Rogers, born and raised in the Panhandle. Grew up fishing these bays, hunting these woods, and love this area. Love the people in this area. I am running because, I've had a lot of successes in my legal career, but the greatest joy of my career really was being able to serve people in the Panhandle. So for the better part of the last year, served as Senator Rick Scott's general counsel, and in that capacity from day one, items came on my desk that pertained to the Panhandle, businesses here, people here, and really the joy of my career has been serving the people of the Panhandle, and so I figured it would be the honor of a lifetime to represent it.
Okay. Why do you want to go? Why do you want to go to Congress? Why do you want to go to Congress?
Sure.
You tell you, yeah, you want to represent it, but why do you want to go to Congress?
I think I'm the only person that I'm aware of in the race that has experience in Congress. Mm-hmm. So I served as chief counsel on the Senate Judiciary Committee, right, and I served as general counsel to Senator Rick Scott. And I think I'm the only person who can show up on day one and be effective. It's not going to be on-the-job training for me. I've drafted legislation, including provisions of the One Big Beautiful Bill. I have conducted congressional investigations, hundreds of hearings. I know what I'm doing there. And I've also seen firsthand how broken Washington is and how much it's in need of leaders. Look, this is the largest district in the state, and it needs to have the most prominent voice in the state. And, you could take that to mean it needs to be an obnoxious voice, but no, we don't need bomb throwers necessarily, but we need someone who's going to fight and be a loud voice for this district.
Almost everybody on the Republican side of this race has described themselves as a MAGA Republican and a supporter of Trump, you included. The latest Rasmussen report as of Friday, February 13th, shows that 40% of likely U.S. voters approve of President Trump's performance, 52% disapprove. Poll shows that 31% strongly approve, 43% strongly disapprove. So with that, and his overall approval index right now is -12. If people aren't really approving right now, why would you support that platform?
I think the proof's in the pudding. I mean, polls are what they are. I think I've talked to regular folks, just in the past few weeks since announcing my campaign. I've talked to thousands of Floridians, and people are happy with the job that he's doing. He's done more in my lifetime than I've seen out of any president, and just in 1 year, and certainly in his first 4 years. So, Madison talks about the president needing to be an energetic executive. The guy, on a daily, weekly basis, he's moved the news. Just watching and following the news, it's dizzying to keep up with, and I think he's been a phenomenal president. So. Polls being what they are, I would certainly back him, and I would certainly, enjoy fighting for his agenda in Congress.
Okay. I'm going to throw out just some topics, and we'll get your response to them. Separation of powers. Separation
of powers, vitally important. To nerd out a little bit, we get the idea from Montesquieu, a French philosopher, and it's vitally important, and that is, exactly what has made our country as good as it is. Justice Antonin Scalia talks about separation of powers, and he says, it's great to have a great Bill of Rights with all of these individual liberties and this and that, but you look at a country like Venezuela, and it has hundreds of individual liberties, but in Venezuela, the people aren't actually free. And what makes our country free, what makes our country special, is separation of powers. And look, the executive branch in particular has become so entirely bloated. There's so much extra fat there that needs to be trimmed, and we are overregulated, just plain and simple. And the administrative state has absolutely exploded. Now, Trump has done a ton to rein that in, but there's obviously more work to do. So I want to fight to do that work.
There are those who would say that President Trump has overused executive orders and taken away some of the power of Congress, which is, of course, separation of powers. Executive orders. What are your thoughts about that?
Executive orders, originally by design, certain things like designating Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America. That's perfect for an executive order. Look, he's taken swift, decisive action through executive orders. We were told for years by Biden that the border can't be closed because Congress needs to do its job and enact this bill. Well, President Trump shows up on day one, and our border's closed. Of course, we need to do our job as Congress to keep the border closed, and we need to do everything that we can to make sure that a Democrat doesn't get in power in the future and open it back wide open the way that Biden did and Mayorkas did. But look, I mean, his executive orders, again, the proof's in the pudding. He's done a phenomenal job, and the economy's correcting, it's moderating, and that's because of swift executive action.
There are those on both sides of the aisle in Congress who agree and disagree with some of these next actions I'm gonna ask you about. And you mentioned the first one, Venezuela. Was he right to go in there and take out the president off of his own soil?
I think absolutely. I mean, Venezuela was an illegitimately elected dictator. The election of him wasn't legitimate. His people had suffered for years under his rule. Chavez eventually, he had taken the oil and basically made it a public sort of good, and you had PDVSA there. And the country was going completely bankrupt. Their bonds were in the roughest shape of any sovereign nation, and Maduro only made it worse. And so, in addition to just being entirely incompetent and being a joke, he also was running the country into the ground, and he also was perpetuating drugs coming into our country. He was a narco-terrorist is what he was. And so certainly I think Trump was within his lawful authority to do what he did.
Okay. The strikes on the alleged drug boats.
Is your question whether they're lawful? Is your question whether they? I like that he did it.
Your thoughts on it? You like that he did that?
Look,
do you think it's lawful?
Look, drugs were coming in and killing our families, killing our children.
They still are.
Yeah, they still are. They still are. But look,
yeah.
You make some of those strikes, and narco-terrorists start to realize he means business. If Trump is anything in this world, he means business, and people know that he's going to put his money where his mouth is. So I think those strikes were a great display of executive power. I think it's certainly within his lawful Article 2 authorities, and I appreciate his decisive action.
ICE enforcement in our cities. Sitting in
entirely lawful. Yeah. Congress enacted legislation that has empowered ICE to do what they're doing, and I applaud their effort.
Do you agree with everything that's happened so far?
Do I agree with everything that's happened so far? Mm-hmm. You'd have to be a little bit more specific.
Well, I mean, we've had a number of people that were shot that were believed to be innocent.
Yeah, and look, I think it's easy to armchair quarterback, and what has happened in a lot of these communities is tragic, but temperatures are at a height that is unseen to this day, and I think a lot of that is Democrats going out of the way to obstruct law enforcement, and that can't happen. We can't have mayhem in our streets, and it's only going to create a culture of just tumult and acrimony, and just temperatures are going to be too high. And so, I think it's a problem that's largely wrought by the Democrats.
White House ballroom.
White House ballroom?
Yeah.
I think Trump has made an effort to make America beautiful again through the arts, through beautiful architecture. I clerked in Tampa, Florida, in the Middle District of Florida for Chief Judge Mary Day down there. Phenomenal judge. And I would just look at these government buildings. They were this sort of brutalist architecture, and it was just ugly, just absolutely ugly. And something that I appreciate that Trump's done is he's reemphasized beauty. And, you know, man was made for beauty. Man was made for goodness. Man was made for truth. And I think Trump is, you know, you look at the Rose Garden, you look at the ballroom, I think he's making it beautiful, and I appreciate that.
Okay. Let's talk about Russia. During Trump's first term, I believe, I'm not mistaken in the way I'm going to say this, I think he viewed Putin as a friend or a ally. The last visit Putin made to the United States didn't seem like that was the case anymore. And the situation in on the border there of Russia is still going on. They're trying to settle it. What are your thoughts on that whole situation, the relationship with Russia?
I think Trump has become sort of fed up with Russia to a large extent, and rightly so. I think Putin has not been very cooperative. I think Trump is a realist and he's a pragmatist and he gets stuff done. And look, do I think Russia is a bastion of goodness and of moral virtue? No, absolutely not. Do I think there needs to be a deal there? Do I think we need peace there? Yeah, absolutely. But President Trump, more than any president in my lifetime, has exhibited peace through strength. And I think he's certainly doing that now. He's taken action with respect to tariffs. He's made it painful in Russia, and he's going to make it more painful in Russia if they don't come to the table and get a deal.
Next question, and the follow-up question, both, would be China, our relationship with China.
I think China's our biggest threat. I think they're an existential threat. I think we have to do everything we can to start onshoring manufacturing, to start making stuff in America again. So much, probably, you know, half the stuff in this room has the Made in China label slapped on it. That's unacceptable, and we have to start bringing jobs here, bringing manufacturing here. You know, whenever I was working as Senator Scott's general counsel, an issue came out about surrogacy, and you basically have these billionaires in China and Chinese officials buying children through U.S. surrogates. And by the way, because of our birthright citizenship laws, are going to be able to have American citizens in their country, fighting age men in 18 years from now who are indoctrinated by the CCP. That is a scary national security issue. So when I started reading these articles, I spoke to the senator about it, and we drafted legislation called the Safe Kids Act. And that bill has tremendous interest. We've had tons of people reaching out to us, trying to join the bill. The Democrats, to be frank, have been spineless on this, and we so far have not had anyone commit to supporting the legislation. But China's an existential threat, and they're literally buying U.S. children. They're doing everything they can to destroy our economy, and I'd say they're our number one adversary.
Okay. You mentioned this other topic a minute ago, tariffs. You supporting them?
Who's supporting them?
Are you supporting them?
Am I supporting them? I think the United States would be a client state if it weren't for tariffs. I'm a free market guy. I love capitalism. I think the economy buzzes and does pretty good when you leave it alone. That being said, Trump acknowledged, rightly so, dating back to the 80s and before, that America was getting ripped off abroad, and he was absolutely right. And so, there are hundreds of countries that we're dealing with. Is every tariff perfect? I don't know. I haven't taken a studied enough approach to know how our reciprocal tariffs look with this or that country. But I would say absolutely, there is a time and place for tariffs. Again, the United States would be a client state if it weren't for tariffs, and I appreciate that he's pushing back.
Okay. Let's take a quick break here, and we'll be back in just a moment with more on Panhandle politics. Stay with us.
Thanks.
Welcome back to this week's edition of Panhandle Politics. Our guest today is Austin Rogers. He's a Republican candidate for the 2nd Congressional District, which, of course, is Neil Dunn's seat. He's decided he's not going to run again for re-election this year. Austin, we left off, we were talking about tariffs, international politics. Let's move back to domestic. Obamacare passed during President Obama's first term, highly criticized, but has given a lot of folks health care that previously didn't have any. A lot of people know the system's not good, but right now it's the best we've got. What do we do?
Obamacare, I think, has been pretty disastrous, and it's on a drip line, it's on a lifeline. Trump kept it going. There needs to be meaningful reform, and there have been bills put out by Senator Rick Scott. Our team has worked together with Senator Rick Scott to address it and to provide meaningful reforms. Senator Cassidy has legislation. I think there's a bunch of things that all of us can agree on. PBM reform absolutely has to happen. People talk about FMAP reform. I think that makes a lot of sense. But I'd say the healthcare system is broken. It's this cobbled together hybrid of private and public, and it's just inefficient. Costs are too high. The prices of drugs are too high, and we got to bring them down.
What do we do?
I just named several
Okay.
items that we could do. I think certainly PBM reform has to be top of mind, and there's bipartisan appetite for PBM reform. And there are plenty of things that we can do in those spaces. But these middlemen are the amount of profits and that they're realizing is it's staggering, and it's unacceptable, and it's greedy.
You bring up a good point. A lot of your possibly future colleagues probably take a lot of contributions from pharmaceutical companies, from the big medical conglomerates. I mean, how do you regulate people that you're with this hand while the other hand is taking money from to run your campaigns? How do you do that?
Sure. I mean, that's a problem as old as time, and I think it takes politicians taking bold action and being principled and doing the right thing regardless of who you've received money from or who you're going to receive money from in the future. I certainly am not going to be a candidate that is bought and paid for. I'm not going to be in anyone's pocket. So regardless of whether Big Pharma has funded someone or whether this or that association has funded someone, I think you got to do the right thing. You got to be principled. And I think our healthcare system's broken. There is no greater champion of that reality than I'd say Senator Rick Scott. He knows the healthcare world very well. He is one of the sharpest minds in Congress on this issue. And certainly we need meaningful reform. I mean, what we're doing is unsustainable, and we're dancing on the Titanic right now. So,
I'm assuming you would say the same thing about prescription drug costs too, right?
100%, yeah. So,
I mean, it's got to be frustrating for people when they're paying $700, $800, $900 for a prescription that's sold overseas in Europe for $15.
Yeah, 100%. And look, you talked about China earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Another massive issue is the supply chain. If China cut off the drug supply chain to the United States right now, north of 80% of us would not have prescription drugs and would not have drugs that we absolutely need. So we have to address that issue. We have to address the cost of drugs. Mm-hmm. There are 100 things in the healthcare space that need to get done, and I think that is honestly where there's space for bipartisan support right now. I'd love to be a champion of those issues.
Let's talk about something that everybody in Florida can relate to: home insurance. I've personally seen my insurance more than double since Hurricane Michael. Is there something the federal government can do to rein that in?
I think Reagan was right whenever he said the scariest words you can hear are, "I'm here from the federal government and I'm here to help." Mm-hmm. I think certainly the more that the state and local governments are empowered to regulate people or to address insurance, et cetera, I think that's going to just lead to better results, and that's just a matter of good governance. I think there are certain ways to nibble around the edges for the federal government to get involved, but I think it's ultimately a state issue.
Okay. Yeah, I've peppered you with all these different hot button topics.
Yeah.
What do you want to do if you get to Congress?
Absolutely. Our platform is the economy and jobs. I want to make sure that I'm fighting for the economy. As I said, Biden left us with a very weak economy with soaring inflation. I think Trump's done a really good job of reining that in and of correcting the economy. Gas was just under $2 last week. But my campaign manager and I were grabbing Chick-fil-A in Tallahassee the other day, and what typically cost me, $10, $12, just got, a Nuggets meal or whatever, cost me $20. And people are feeling a pinch at the checkout line. People are feeling a pinch when they're buying their groceries. So Trump's done a phenomenal job, but there's a ton more work to do. And so I'd like to address the economy. I've seen government waste, fraud, and abuse lead to companies in the Panhandle having to lay off workers. That's unacceptable, and we have to fight for jobs here in the Panhandle and in the 2nd District. Next up, I would say, is military. So as a military brat, the son of a fighter pilot, grandson of a fighter pilot, great-grandson of a fighter pilot, I love our military. It's in my DNA. I grew up on base housing, and we have to empower our military. Tyndall, the Navy base, these are strategic. These are important bases, and we shouldn't be moving warriors off our bases. We should be investing more in our bases, and we are. Billions of dollars are going into redevelopment, and there's the F-35 wing out there, but we have to be supporting those who are fighting for us. And I'd say the third is public safety. So whenever I was serving as Senator Rick Scott's general counsel, Panama City officials came up and visited us in Washington, Steve Sutherland, et cetera, to talk to us about public safety concerns. Whenever I am walking my children through Walmart or through Publix, I shouldn't have to be worried about clutching them as masked thugs come in and ransack the Walmart. Yet that happened just minutes from where we are. And as soon as Steve Sutherland and all the Panama City folks came up and started talking to us about this issue, I immediately picked up the phone, called the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Florida, and we were able to crack down on that. These people are moving in interstate commerce, they're selling guns, they're selling drugs, and we have to address public safety. Spring break season's important for the local economy, but we have to thread the needle of empowering the local economy, bolstering it, empowering businesses, but also keeping our communities safe. Same thing with Leon County and some of the rural districts that I have a heart for. Crime those areas are rife with crime, especially Leon County. So we have to make sure that our people feel safe. And so that's another pillar. But look, there's a ton of more. I could think of 50 more issues that I'm interested in addressing in Congress. I think NIL legislation needs to happen. Everyone loves college football. We have a lot of Florida State. We have a lot of Florida Gator fans. Don't hold it against me, but I'm an Alabama fan.
There's a lot of those here, too.
Yeah, that's right. But college football has become a mess with NIL, with the transfer portal, and there's meaningful things that Congress can do, and really Congress is the only entity that can do some of the stuff. We need an antitrust exemption, for example, and I would love for people to enjoy watching college sports as much as they used to. So
I could sit here and talk with you a lot longer, but we are out of time.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate your time.
We're going to be back in just a minute. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Panhandle Politics. Our guest today has been the Republican congressional candidate for the 2nd Congressional District, Austin Rogers. Of course, we're going to have a number of other candidates who are running for that race coming on the show in the coming weeks. Appreciate you joining us. We'll see you again next week for another edition of Panhandle Politics.